There are plenty of incantations left in Elden Ring that might surprise you how much damage they can deal and how efficient they can be in combat. Today we'll take a look at 5 more amazing incantations that can literally melt bosses and at the same time also make you look extremely cool in the process. Now some of these do come very late in the game, so on that note I also want to give a spoiler warning to everyone, as a couple of these incantations will require you to kill some of the endgame bosses. But that should not be a problem 3 weeks after the game's release, so on that note let's begin with the first one, which is the Frozen Lightning Spear. This is dropped by a Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella boss you can find in the throne room close to the Angel River downstream side of Grace. Once you defeat it, it immediately drops the incantation and it requires about 34 points into faith to use it. Now when you cast this, it will summon a nice lightning spear from above, dealing damage right in front of you, and it also spreads several lightning strikes further away from your character in a cone-like pattern. This, like pretty much most of the other lightning strike spells of its type in the game, will work best if you can align all of the strikes into the same target. In this case, both the initial cast as well as the subsequent ones that will travel away from your character. The best options will obviously be enemies with large hitboxes, especially the longer ones, including some of these dragons or lava worms. If you can make sure that you can hit the same target with the initial strike and the further ones, you're going to deal thousands of damage and also create frost buildup on the same enemy, which will further debuff their defenses by another 20%, so the subsequent ones will deal even more damage when you cast another lightning strike against them. Now obviously there are some downsides to this spell. The most important is the fact that it seems to be quite inconsistent. Sometimes it might even appear to almost completely miss all of its strikes against a target, even though that might seem to qualify in the general area where you should get hit. In this case, what you want to do is to just make sure you aim them with the later part of the lightning strikes, where the cone of the strikes is the largest, pretty much the end portion of the spell. At least in my experience, that seems to deal the highest amount of damage if you happen to miss with everything else in the meantime. Now moving on to number 2, let's talk about another one, which is Theodorix Magma. This is an upgraded version of the basic Magma breath, but it's much more improved. It can be cast 2 times in a row and at the same time it deals a larger magma pool around you. You need to head over to the inner consecrated snowfields, follow the frozen river east, and then go ahead and defeat the great worm Theodorix so that you can unlock the incantation back at the Cathedral of Dragon Communion in Caelid, point at which you can go there, buy it, and pretty much use it. Now this will require a pretty okay 21 Faith and 14 Arcane, which is perfect because you can then couple this with a Dragon Communion seal that doesn't just scale insanely well with Arcane, it also boosts your Dragon Communion spells, which Theodorix Magma totally is, so that's another 10 to 15% free damage on top. Now by default the cast speed on this is super low, and most often than not you will not want to cast it like this. As a matter of fact, you will want to cast it in a different way to make it or transform it into an almost instant cast, and that is to first start with a Catch Flame, which also deals a very high damage, and then immediately switch and follow up with the Theodorix Magma. If you combine these 2 spells, you can cast both of them instantly. You just need to switch them fast enough, and this should already deal anywhere between 8 to 10,000 damage depending on the enemy. At the same time, this also leaves a pool of magma at their feet for some additional damage and also some great interruption in case anybody is, trying to get close to you before you get a chance to cast the second one. Now definitely don't forget to also buff yourself with the Flame Grant Me Strength. It greatly benefits this spell, and it also makes use of the Fire Scorpion Charm and other talismans that buff incantation damage to reach these crazy numbers, and it's totally worth it if you want to just instantly melt enemies. But moving on to number 3, the next incantation I was not sure if I wanted to include on today's list, but after doing some testing, it actually seems to be more important than I initially thought. This is the Scouring Black Flame. It is dropped by the Godskin boss you can find in the Windmill Village north of the Altus Plateau. Now this does require 28 points into Faith, but only consumes about 27 FP, which is great because it also deals some very high damage. It has a long cast, that is true, but it can sweep the area upwards with a wide black flame attack, which means you will rarely miss with this as long as you're on the same level or slightly below your enemy. But this can pump some really great damage if you combine it with a Godslayer seal, a Fire Scorpion charm, and you can also throw that Flame Grant Me Strength in the mix. Now this might not pull about 7 to 10,000 per cast like how other incantations did, but it's definitely easy to hit the target. Its cast is not that long, you can quickly follow up with a few before the enemies react and just pull off like half of the enemy's HP before they even get a chance to react, especially since most of the boss encounters in Elden Ring are pretty much going to give you a ton of openings at the start of them, so you can unleash some of this damage way before that happens. Now this is also great against groups of enemies, especially the ones that are just a little bit further away from you, so that you can hit all of them at the same time with the wide range of the Scouring Black Flame. There are some downsides to it on the other hand. One of them is the fact that you can get easily interrupted during that cast, so against fast enemies it's not ideal. At the same time, since those flames travel upwards, if there's any enemies below you, sometimes it might be hard for you to hit them in the first place, so that's something that you also want to pay attention to. Now moving on to number 4, we can't make an incantation list of the best in the game without also including the next one, which is the Swarm of Flies, an amazing option to create blood loss, especially for an arcane faith caster. You can find this upon a corpse in the Mogwin Palace. From the side of Grace, simply head over right here in the forest until you reach this middle section of the mountains onto the right side. There's going to be a cave around the middle section with a corpse inside holding the incantation, so you can go ahead and take it right away. Now this is another one that benefits greatly from high arcane builds, so again the Dragon Communion Seal and a high arcane level will do wonders with this, especially since you don't just get to release a Swarm of Flies with this one, but also create extreme blood loss upon enemies. They do travel quite far and they do move a little bit slow, but once they reach the enemy, they can pretty much almost instantly create that bleed buildup and more often than not also interrupt enemies. The cast on this is also not too long, which means you can quickly overwhelm an enemy with multiple swarms and just increase that blood loss like no other weapon in the game can at the moment. Of course, the damage on the initial bites are not going to be that hard, but you don't care about that, you will care about the blood loss. It's also great at stopping skewers and impales or any other type of charge attack that moves towards you. The best example would be probably the Clean Rot Knights that tend to charge a lot with their spears. Well, if you throw one of these at their faces, they will simply stop, and there's other bosses in the game that can be completely staggered when you cast one of these. I would also say that they can set enemies on fire, including some of those hand enemies, so it definitely comes in handy. Now moving on to number 5 and the last one, this is definitely the surprise on the list, especially since a lot of people said that it's not a great spell, but in reality it's actually an amazing one and possibly one of the best. This is the Black Blade. It's something you get very late in the game once you defeat Malekith. If you do that, you can bring his remembrance back at the round table and get the Black Blade incantation instead of his weapon. This one has a high faith requirement of 46, but it's one of the coolest cast animations right now in the game. You will shoot waves of black and red light that deal holy damage, but also reduce the target's HP by about 10%. Now I really can stress how excellent the HP reduction is, especially against enemies with large HP pools. You're gonna be able to just reduce their HP way more than anything else in the game, and that also lasts for pretty much the entire fight until you reset it, which means if they heal up or if they regenerate in a way, they will never get to the same amount that they had when the fight just started. It also deals some nice holy damage, and what I noticed is that even though this is technically getting buffed by holy damage, so this includes something like the Holy Scorpion charm, it does seem to work against holy resistant enemies, including the Elden beast. In theory, pretty much all other holy spells in the game will heal it, while this one will actually take huge chunks of its HP quite easily. But at the same time, you also get super armor during the initial cast, which means most of the attacks in the game will not be able to stop you, so there's very few things that can cancel this attack unless it's something super devastating or coming from a really big boss. Nonetheless, these are the 5 incantations. Totally let me know down below which are your favorite and have you been using any of these recently. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.